everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Tiffany Cosplay, and today's video is a time-lapse tutorial of how I made my She-Ra cosplay. Now this is more so the one from the 80's cartoon with a little bit of a mishmash of artwork and the Sideshow Masters of the Universe statue. So yeah, here we go. Hopefully it's helpful. Okay, first up we have the crown, and I just made this by transferring my pattern onto a couple of layers of warbler. I've used the pearly warbler here, and I did cut it when it was already warm and a little bit soft to work with, and then I kept on just reheating it, getting it nice and flat before actually bending it into shape. And then I also transferred the same pattern to EVA foam. This was then glued over the warbler base once I've cut it out, which you can see here. So I'm just making sure everything fits. So that's glued down just with contact cement, and the layer of foam is so I can Dremel the details in. So here I am just drawing where the details will need Dremeling. I'm just doing this with a Sharpie and I'm eyeballing it, and those little lines are where I can see that it needs Dremeling. So here you can see a really bad quality video of me Dremeling outside, and that gem I just made with hot glue, which I think I'll show you later on in the video. And I'm just using a little bit of foam clay to just give that gem an edge, so it's not just sat plonked on top there. So that's what that looks like. This was primed with a few coats of Flex Bond, which is why it's nice and shiny there and nice and smooth after it was heat sealed, of course. Then it was painted with my trusty black base and then gold. Now I think I used about 3 or 4 layers of gold to achieve that color, and here I'm just using a clear red to go over the gem, and then I'm just adding in some weathering and some dimension, some black paint. And here the final step for painting is a clear coat, and I use a Tamiya brand, just the acrylic clear coat. It's a tiny tub, packs a punch, goes a long way. Up next we have the cape, and I just hand drew like a basic cape shape. The fabric is folded in half, so this is half of the cape shape, which is why I pinned it together there to cut it and keep it all symmetrical as I was cutting it out. Then I'm just folding over the edges here, which I am then sewing just to tidy them up a little bit, so it's not a raw edge when I'm wearing a cape. And then the gold details, I've used like a heat transfer thing. I don't think it was a vinyl, it was some kind of heat transfer thing. So I've put it onto the gold fabric that I'm using. I think I just used like a heat and bond or something for this. So I've put my gold onto it, and now I am transferring it onto the red velvety kind of fabric. And this actually did adhere surprisingly well. I've worn this costume a few times now and it still hasn't come off. These are just other little bits of details that I have also used with like heat and bond or heat transfer stuff. And I'm just repeating the same process by ironing them onto the cape itself. And the cape I've attached with snaps. So I'm just sewing on the piece of fabric that has the snaps attached, and they just fold under themselves and snap closed. So here is the template for the shoulder armor that I'm transferring to foam. Now this was quite a few layers from memory, so I would do the largest template. There is a warbler base, so I made this very much the same way as I did the crown, with a warbler base, and then I've just laid up the foam as, yeah, the version that I've done has like a few layers of the armor, which is just what I've done here. So again, it was just primed with Flex Bond, painted black, and then painted gold and silver with a clear blue being used on the gem here. To get a more intense color, you obviously can layer up with a couple of layers if you need to, and then it would be clear coated. So this is just templating one of the braces or the arm gauntlets here. Just again eyeballing everything, and that is done on the fold to get the rough shape, and then I make my little tweaks from there, just keeping in mind when you transfer it to foam, it will fit slightly different as foam is thicker than the paper that you'll be using, which is what I've compensated for here. As you can kind of see, I've traced outside of the pattern, so I'm just testing the fit. it's better to make it too big because then you can cut off what you need and make it smaller, but it's a lot easier to cut it down than it is to add foam in. So once I knew that one was the size it needed, I just traced around that one bracer that I cut for the other one. And here I am heat forming it to give it its curved shape, which is also giving it a bit of a heat seal at the same time. So 2 birds, 1 stone. And I'm just shaping it. So doing this just makes it a little bit easier to glue, and then I just rejigged the size a little bit because they can stretch a little bit when they are heat sealed. As you can see, it's glued together there, and now I'm adding some masking tape just to template the next layer of details that will go over this. And if the braces are the same size, the same template should work for both. And I'm just transferring that to paper so it's easy to work with and not get stuck on anything. And do label all of your templates so you know exactly where to go. And here I am drawing and eyeballing the detail that is on the bracer, as you can kind of see from the reference picture that I'm using there. And again, this is done on the fold, so it's symmetrical on both sides, and it is test fit before cutting out and making sure everything is fine. And that is another hot glue gem. So here I'm just gluing down another detail layer, which will be Dremeled. I did end up just cutting a little slit in the foam so I could get it on and off a lot easier. And now I'm just drawing the lines that I will need to carve out. So I've glued the hot glue gem down first, and now the detail, which has since been Dremeled, has gone over the top of that. And I'm just using 3D paint to create an edge for the gem. I was being pretty lazy at this point and couldn't be bothered cutting up a piece of foam. So if you have 3D paint on hand or can access it, it's actually really good for filling in little gaps for edges like that if you don't want to use foam clay or like a filling product. Yeah, so that was also heat sealed. It was primed with Flex Bond, painted black, and here I'm doing probably I'd say maybe even the 3rd layer of gold. I'm pretty sure I used about 4 layers of gold on all the gold pieces of this. So as you can see, it's quite a lot brighter there. And just going back in with the clear blue paint. These are also the Tamiya brand as well. And it would have been clear coated as well. So up next we have the bulk of the costume, which is the corset. I'm just heat forming some warbler over a mannequin that I have. I'm using Pearly Warbler here, and I am very lucky in that I am roughly the same size as the mannequin. But if you do have a mannequin and want to try this method, you usually would have a little bit of wiggle room, especially if you have the back as being like a stretch fabric of some kind. You will have a little bit of wiggle room and have it fit like a corset. So here I'm just drawing out the basic patterns and shapes of the corset, and the gap I'm leaving at the back is because I'm putting stretch fabric in there, so it's got a bit of wiggle room and I can really just make it fit tight and comfortable. So once I've cut out the shape of the corset itself, I am templating again over it because this is going to be covered with Cobra cast and then with fabric. So this is a template I'll be using for that. And with fabric, is we obviously don't heat seal it like we do with thermoplastic. It needs to be able to fit the curve of the boobs. So that's why we're transferring another pattern separately for the boobies, which is what we're doing here, making sure all my little templates fit together. So here I'm cutting out my template that I've just created and I'm transferring it to the Cobra cast. The Cobra cast obviously doesn't need like seam allowance or anything. I did add a little bit of one on the bottom so I could fold it over, I think, from memory. But this is just another thing that you heat form like warbler. It will adhere to warbler and it will, for the most part, adhere fairly well to fabric as well. It is a little bit fiddly to work with. But yeah, if you're wanting to stick fabric down, it's a great in-between method. So here I am making some of the corset pieces like out of the fabric, and this one I think is a boob that I'm making at the moment. I use like a stretch pearly kind of fabric. I can't remember, I think it's bog finish or something along those lines, and I've heated up the Cobra cast and I'm now placing the fabric over the Cobra cast because it does stick to the fabric, which is awesome. And now here I did cut out the corset template out of the same fabric, and I'm just sewing this together like I would a normal corset. I've made an edge at the top to sit under the boob line and everything, so it's not just a raw edge. And again, I'm just heating up the Cobra cast slowly and methodically and gently applying the fabric over it, because one, I don't want to burn the fabric as I'm heating up the Cobra cast as I go along, and two, I don't want to let the corset get out of shape from reheating things up. So here I'm just folding over the fabric at the bottom just to give it a tidy edge. And here I have made the fabric back, and at this point I've used underneath the main, like the pearly layer, I've actually used like a scuba kind of fabric that's a bit thicker, just to give it a little bit more strength. So that's what I'm sewing in there. I'm also sewing in some padding for the boob cups because my boobies are not as big as my mannequin, unfortunately. So that's what that was for. And now here we are making just some more detail pieces for the front center of the breastplate. This is another case of just chipping away at the template, cutting away bits as I need and just making more templates. It's just always good to layer things, and then if you've got a template that's multiple layers, either use tracing paper to create the layers or cut as you go and label everything. So again, just still chipping away all these detail layers. I'm using some of the adhesive backed foam here just to save a little bit of time, keep things a little bit neater so there's no Dremel dust involved as much, or no contact cement. This is more adhesive backed foam. You can get it in varying thicknesses. This one's about 10 mil thick, so that little gold piece at the front is what I'm working on here. Just layering up with some unusual shapes that's on the front of that, and this will all have to be Dremeled once it's together. So this is more shapes. This is the front center, and it goes around the top and along the sides of the top of the breastplate. So just make sure everything fits how I want, and this is what it looks like Dremeled. Then it has all been primed with Flex Bond and painted black and then gold. The bits where I'm not painting is because there'll be more fine stuff over the top of that. And this is just glued down with contact cement onto the corset itself. So we've got some more lining and base coating that we're doing here, and you can see the pieces that look white, that was just a Flex Bond drying. And again, our multiple layers of gold paint, and just using contact cement to glue it down again. That hole in the middle is so I can pop a hot glue gem in there again. So to make a hot glue gem, I've sculpted a gem out of like a clay or like an epoxy sculpt kind of thing, and I'm just using silicone putty to create my mold. It's quick, it's tidy. Pull it out, and then I'm just filling it in with hot glue. You do need the hot glue to be nice and hot so it's more liquidy, and then once it's set and dry, you just pop it out. And then I'm just painting that with my clear blue paint. And now I'm templating the bottom portion of the corset just with a masking tape and eyeball hand drawing it, and additional details, which these will then be transferred to foam. And as with the rest of it, it's been Dremeled, heat sealed, and I'm gluing it down. I don't really know why I didn't Flex Bond, like prime and paint it first. I'm sure there was some reasoning behind it, maybe because of the layer that it glued over, but that was just painted the same way as the other gold details. Now the skirt was templated with paper, and I'm just drawing the lines as to where it sits, which I also did. They were stuck on the inside of the corset with masking tape, and I did draw around the inside so I knew where to glue them underneath, which we'll see later. But basically each skirt flap was transferred to a scuba fabric which did not have a seam allowance, and then it was transferred to the main fabric, which is the same fabric that I used for the body of the corset, and that did have a seam allowance so I could fold over the edges and just have it a little bit neater. As you can see here, this was just to give the skirt flaps just a little bit of weight and structure and strength. So I'm sewing the main fabric over the scuba fabric here, just a simple top stitch. As you can see, it's still stretchy, And this is just adhesive back foam, which I am using for the little gold detail that goes on the bottom of each skirt flap. They were lightly dremeled, they were primed with Flex Bond and painted black, as you can see here. And then again, just some multiple layers of gold paint. I'm using the Plate Effects paints here, which I used for all the gold on this build. And they were top coated with the Tamiya clear coat, and as you can see, I'm just pulling off the backing of the adhesive back foam and just sticking it straight to the fabric. It does actually stick surprisingly well to fabric. And there were some details on each skirt flap, which again, I could not be bothered making them out of foam and having to paint it. It was a lot of fine fiddly details. So I got some pearly white 3D paint and I am just drawing the pattern onto each skirt flap. You do have to be careful to not smudge it because it does take a little while to dry, but this was just a method that I found worked best because it allowed me to have the detail without it being too busy and too much of a detail. Now I made a bunch of hot glue gems and these also stick on the bottom of these skirt flaps. And then the last step was just to glue these skirt flaps to the underside of the corset so they pretty much turn into like a little mini dress, and there's just a velcro closure at the back. Now for the boots, these were actually much more simple than I had thought they were going to be. I was intending on putting foam details on again, but again I was mindful of just how detailed that would be, so I have used a pair of thrifted boots and I have used 3D paint to create all of the details, and I am painting the 3D paints black, and then the entire boots get painted gold, and I'm using a leather paint in like a pearly gold here. And again, this is something that would take a good 2 or 3 coats to really get the level of gold that I wanted, because as you can see, the black's still showing through a little bit there. Now the sword was the last piece of the costume that I made, and this was 3D printed. I will see if I can find the file and link it below in the video description. So I just print in PLA. I just try to keep it as fine of a layer height as I can, and I'm just using super glue to glue it all together. And then I used like a vehicle spray putty, and I just do quite a few coats of this. Like I do a coat and then I sand it down, do a coat, sand it down, do another coat, sand it down, and maybe do another coat, and then wet sand it. And I just rinse and repeat until it's as smooth as I want, or until I run out of spray putty. And then once that's all primed and ready to go with the putty, I've gone through with a hammered metal black metallic base coat, and I've got my hot glue gem there. And I'm now just painting the detail. I'm pretty sure I used like the Tamiya paints as well for this, which didn't work quite as well as I'd hoped, but it did the job, it did fine. And then I've just used some leather to put over the handle, and it looks like I've got some Cobra Cast wrapped there, but I did use some super glue to hold the leather strapping in place because I did not want it to budge like at all. And I also provided a little bit of strength to the handle, which was 3D printed. And then this is just how the costume looked all together. Thank you so much for watching my She-Ra video. Hopefully it's helpful for some of you with a slightly different way of how I made it. As always, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. You don't have to, of course, but it was hugely appreciated. Share it, tag your friends if it's helpful for you. Tag me so I can share your amazing work. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Bye.